So really today, what we kind of want to talk to everybody about is going to be very open discussion. So of course, as always, feel free to unmute yourself, jump in with any uh, questions or comments or anything like that. But this is mainly going to be focused on helping you guys through this weird period where you're not able to really hire photographers for a lot of stuff unless it's a vacant home in Mecklenburg County. And Brendan's going to kind of give you his tips and tricks as a real estate photographer, and hopefully we can help you in any way that we can so that you guys can still promote your listings and still kind of market the homes in a really professional way, even if on the back end those photos are shot with an iPhone or
well, as professional as we can make it, considering everything that's going on, yes. So, but for those who don't know me, my name is Brendan. I work in the marketing department. I'm actually here in the Ballantyne office. I've been at Remax Executive now for 6 years. So if you've never met me or heard of me, my name is Brendan. Hi, nice to meet you. I do a lot of different things here. I'm a professional photographer. I do interiors and exteriors. I shoot for interior designers, architects, all sorts of different people. I have probably 8 years of photography experience. I'm also a professional graphic designer. I've worked for ESPN, NFL, the NBA, so I have a well-versed background as far as graphic design goes. I've also done professional album covers for major recording artists and stuff like that. My degree is in print design, which is another thing that I handle for agents here. So if you guys ever want to do postcard blast or have anything about farming that you're interested in doing, I can always help with that. It's hard to see who's here because I just see 2-letter initials, but if somebody's in here, I may have done stuff for you in the past. You guys can see my screen okay, I'm assuming. Like, Sarah, you see it, correct?
Yeah, I can see everyone's little initials.
Okay, so I can give you a quick rundown. So this is my website here. If you guys want to pull it up, it's the letter B and then Kahm, which is my last name, K-A-H-M as in Mary. This shows kind of my work, so you can kind of see what I do. Obviously, these are shot with a DSLR, which is a professional camera. And today what we're going to be discussing is how you guys can kind of get, if you have a listing, like what you should be doing in order to get, listing photos, at least as well as you can get, probably with a phone. I'm not sure how many of you have professional cameras. If you do, that's a separate discussion. I can help kind of walk through that. I know that right now it's kind of crazy because of how the rules go. As far as myself goes, I still shoot. Matter of fact, I shot 2 properties yesterday. I shot one the day before that. So I'm still working. And, I'm an in-house service. So if you guys do need professional photography, you can always reach out to me. Sarah can give you my contact information because I have the longest email address in the history of email addresses. But if you guys aren't familiar with the rules right now, and I've been on the Mecklenburg County hotline calling them, and if some of you guys have also called, you've probably heard, a gamut of different things. So right now, we're only supposed to be shooting vacant properties. And from what they told me the last time I called, a vacant property means literally vacant, no furniture, nothing in the house at all. Which is really all that I've been shooting is just literally vacant homes. So that's kind of where we're starting today. I'm going to go under the assumption that you guys may have access to your clients. So if it's just, let's say, a husband and wife, and you are able to physically go to a property and you have a cell phone, how you can kind of make the best of the situation that we currently have to get you something that's usable for your listings. So Sarah, do you have any, I know we had a rundown of questions. Is there any, did you want me to go over that or?
Yeah, so let's kind of just walk through kind of what the topics and things that we were going to talk about. So Brendan, other than kind of not being able to go on site to a lot of these homes, and the agents are kind of having to adapt to it, I was hoping that you'd be able to help them kind of walk through your process so that they can either mimic it or help their clients mimic it to kind of get some of these photos. So when you're setting up for a shoot or you're preparing for a shoot or you're giving kind of some advice so they can get the house ready for it, kind of what does that process look like and what are kind of some of your suggestions?
Okay, well, my process is a little bit different from most photographers. So I'm a compositor. So when I shoot, I actually blend multiple frames by hand and I bounce lights off of multiple surfaces and I take the best parts of those images to make one photo, which sounds really confusing, and it is if you're not familiar with how Lightroom and Photoshop work. But my process with any house that I go into is usually time of day is your big thing. What's the weather doing outside? That's kind of a big factor of what your photos are going to look like. Believe it or not, if you talk to most professional photographers, a cloudy day for interiors and exteriors is actually perfect because the lighting is nice and even across all surfaces that way, especially for your exterior photos. So when I see a cloudy day, I know that your exterior images are always going to come out great because I always replace the sky in Photoshop. So on my personal computer, I have a library of skies. I probably have 300 or 400 of them that I've either taken myself or paid for. And what I'll do is I'll just replace the sky in Photoshop, and nobody will even know that it wasn't cloudy that day. But everything won't have harsh shadows or super hot highlights on them. And if you are taking a photo outside with your camera, you'll notice, if you have the sun behind the house, the front of it will always be in shadow. So you'll only see detail on the outside where things aren't what we call blown out in photography. But my process typically on most houses is, outside of the weather, is I always walk through the house first. If an agent happens to be there, I'll look for things that I say need to be moved. So if other rooms are ready, I can start shooting those rooms while an agent goes and moves things for me. Things I look for, countertops is usually the big thing. I always start in bathrooms first. If there's toothbrushes, toothpaste, water picks, some women have jewelry stands on there where they'll have a bunch of necklaces and stuff. I just ask that stuff is moved. You don't like touching that stuff. I don't like touching that stuff, especially now. So I always try to get that stuff removed. While I'm in the bathroom, the other thing I always check for is to make sure that your toilet seat is down, both of them. You don't want toilet seats up for your photography. And then I always check and take a look at the toilet paper and make sure that it's not hanging down off of the roll. It's not got a jagged edge if somebody ripped it, because everybody just rips the toilet paper off. Try to make the edge nice and even if you can. Or if you had a cleaner come in, and sometimes they like to do a little fun rose thing on top of it, that's always great too. Kitchens, I always, everybody's got a different taste as far as what they consider is acceptable in a kitchen. For me, I personally want to make sure that things that you typically see in the kitchen are okay. So for me, if you have a Keurig or a coffee maker, if you have a set of knives on there, that's completely fine. If somebody has a stack of bills, a lot of people just grab your mail or whatever and you throw it on the counter. Stuff like that is what you're going to want to move. Pots and pans, I always make sure that they're off of countertop. Some people, I've been in a house and you may have like a teapot or something like on the stove. I try and remove stuff like that. It's okay to add little things like fruit bowls, or if you have something like bananas or something that's going to add a splash of color, that's always great to have. Blankets, straight in your living room. I'll show you some examples today. It's of my living room, so it's going to be messy because we're in a pandemic, and I'll be honest, I don't clean my house every single day, and I have a 4-year-old and she kind of ruins everything. So we'll go from there. But those are the first things that I check for before I start shooting. Now, like I said before, I'm under the assumption that you guys are going to be taking these photos probably with a phone. So most of the stuff I'm going to tell you today is going to be based off of the assumption that you're shooting with either an iPhone or, if you have a Pixel, if you're an Android user, or a Samsung Galaxy, something like that. Everything is going to be different. I just personally switched to an iPhone 11 Pro. I've been an Android user for years. I prefer the way that Pixel cameras work versus iPhone. Personally, for me, I like the way that they render the photos better than the iPhone 11 Pro, but I mostly got my iPhone 11 Pro for the video capabilities, that's another topic we can cover at a different time. If you're shooting with a phone, you're going to want to make sure that you have lights on. Typically, when I shoot with a DSLR, I prefer the lights to be off all the time, especially if you have a bunch of different colors in a room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain why we do that. Here's an example of a bathroom I shot the other day. Now, to you guys, that may look fine. Can everybody see this okay? Can you see my screen fine?
Looks good.
Up? Okay, so you see this bathroom, it's, you know, as is. This is with the, you can see I have the practical light and these practical lights on. What this does is it takes this color here and it bounces it all over here. So to your eye that may look fine, it's warm, but if we do what we call a white balance, and this is Adobe Lightroom if you guys aren't familiar with Lightroom. So if you guys aren't going to have off-camera flash, which is something that I personally use, but if I go over here to something that's white and I white balance this, do you see did you guys notice the difference there? Did you catch that slight difference? This is warm, or what we call warm in photography, but the actual colors is more here. And that's something that you can actually download apps to get your colors correct. And we'll go over some of the apps that I mentioned towards the end of the webinar there.
So it's kind of like a filter then that you're setting up to kind of brighten the room.
Without getting technical, it's not really a filter. What it's doing is it's trying to take color casting out as much as possible. You guys aren't going to have off-camera flash, which is how I color correct things, which is also why I typically shoot with the lights off. Because I know that the way that I shoot is the light that I use is daylight temperature balance. I know that when I'm compositing, all my white balances are the same. So what was the next question that you had? So we kind of gone through what to look for. I mean, if you guys are shooting vacant homes, it's not really that big of a deal. I can kind of show you my screen. This house is completely vacant, as you can see. I mean, there's nothing in this. There's nothing in here to really show you. You can kind of see this is my process here. If you can see my screen, this is me bouncing a big light. So I'm lighting this area over here. This is kind of my process that I do. This isn't really going to help you guys in this case, but I'm just kind of showing you, like, you know, typically when we're shooting, you know, you care more about the what we call composition of the photo. And that's kind of what, I guess we can go into the composition first, because that's probably where we're going to have the most questions. So,
hey, Brendan.
Yep.
Before we jump into composition, can we talk a little bit more about lighting and kind of break it down and just kind of focus on it from kind of like a simple perspective, so that if you're using your cell phone, you said that they should have like the ceiling lights on, or should they be using?
Yeah, you guys with your cell phones, here's what I typically do. If you have gray walls, for example, gray is a great color, because when I'm white balancing stuff, you're trying to find something that's white or gray. If you have gray, window lighting looks really, really good. What I would do is I would open all my blinds and I would have all the lights on. If you're in a room that's small, like a guest room, for example, and let's say you have a neutral color, a white or a gray, if you have nice window lighting, you can keep the lights off, and that will give you a more pleasing interior design sort of look to your photo. Sometimes you can't help that if you're in a kitchen that's got really dark cabinets, for example, or if you have really dark colors like a navy blue. That's where you're going to want as much light on as you can. There's not going to be much that you can do on your end about that. You're going to have color casting, not a huge deal. We'll go over later some ways that you can get rid of that through some vendors, or if you guys want to download Lightroom Mobile, which is a tool that I would recommend for you guys. I believe it's free, and that will allow you actually to shoot raw, and we can get into that a little bit later as well. I did see a question in here about how do you make sure you get a whole bathroom. That was going to be one of my tips, but if you want the answer to that now, here's what I tell people. If you're in a bathroom, and I run into this quite a bit, if you're in a bathroom, for example, that you have a giant mirror on one side, and you have like a, you know, you have your sink and stuff over here, and then you have like a shower that may be hidden through like another door frame or something, I tell people to shoot into the mirror. So if I show you this example here, I angled the camera to the right into the mirror on purpose. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to show that there's actually a shower back there. So it's subtle, but that's a way, if you do have access to a mirror, is to shoot into the mirror, and that will allow you to actually show the entire space versus shooting just straight on. That's a trick that I use quite a bit. It happens a lot in Jack and Jill bathrooms, just because a lot of Jack and Jills, if they're going straight through to a room, typically you have 2 sinks or 1 sink, and then the bathroom is usually tucked on the side. If you get lucky with a mirror, you can actually angle it in there, still show both rooms, but also get the shower in there to show the whole room. That's a little trick that a lot of photographers would use.
So, Brendan, the pictures that I have seen, some of them where you have the agent's like arm or part of their body in the mirror, that's a big no-no, right?
Yeah, you guys are going to have to, mirrors is something that you're going to have to try and be away from. Sometimes you can't help it, and you guys aren't Photoshop experts, so I'm not going to expect to show you how to clone that out. That's something that I personally run into a lot. That's done in Photoshop, where I have to do what we call clone work. Cloning work always is the most, the most time that I spend editing photos is usually cloning something out. You're gonna have to. Sometimes there's just not gonna be anything you can do without moving the mirror. And I've been in giant closets before. Some people have a nice master closet, and you may have like a huge mirror at the end. There's just no way around it. I know that I'm gonna have to clone it. That is something that, I mean, you probably are just gonna have to either show yourself just your arm sticking out, or either try and take it where you're just showing an angle where you're cutting yourself off. So you can be in the room enough, but if you turn the camera, you would actually be able to cut yourself out of one section, only show 1/2 of something. Sometimes you can do it that way as well.
So maybe for a room like that, you would do multiples, like multiple
right,
shots and angles.
Yeah, or a little trick that I use is if I'm in a bathroom that has a huge mirror, and sometimes you have maybe a plant or something that you can stick in front of the camera. So what I'll do is I'll take like a plant or something and move it in the mirror so that where the camera is actually hidden by the plant. And when you take a photo that way, it just looks like there's a plant or a towel rack or something is in the way. So that's also another trick. If you have access to light staging stuff, you can do that as well. But yeah. Do you want me to get into the composition part?
Yeah, I think we're good. Does anyone have any questions on like lighting or anything like that before we move on? Cool.
Nope.
Yeah, let's talk composition.
Okay, so composition.
Yes, actually, I want to have, if you don't mind, Brendan, a little bit more information about lighting the corners of the rooms. And I did have to step away for a second. If you've already covered it, forgive me. I'll just find out later.
Well, in the case of cell phone photography, what I would say is there's not really going to be a lot you can do other than make sure all your blinds are open and every practical light is on. All your lights in the room are on. A good key that I was going to get into for your cell phone photography is if you have an HDR function on your phone. Most of the new phones have it. That's something that you're going to want to turn on. If you have a newer iPhone or a newer Android phone, HDR or high dynamic range photography is something that's already typically turned on. If it's not turned on and you want to double check, if you have an iPhone, if you go into your settings and then you go to the camera, there's actually an HDR function on your camera there. And another thing that I was going to mention while we're if you happen to have an iPhone and you're in your settings, if you go into your settings panel and you scroll down, and I'm looking at my phone now, and you go to the camera, there's an option on there called grid. And I would suggest turning your grid on if you can. When I shoot real estate photos, I actually use what we call a cam ranger. So I actually don't touch my camera at all. It stays in one spot. I use a giant iPad, and I'm allowed to trigger my camera from my iPad. And my viewfinder has a giant grid on it, which is, it's basically lines that go up and down and dissect your image that you see into what we call thirds. And that was when we get into composition, we're going to talk about the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is pretty simple. If you have a square and you're taking a photo, you have, imagine 3 grids like this. You have one line, one line, one line. You're trying to get even ceiling, even floor, and then the middle part even, as well, breaking your image up into thirds. So You don't want to point the camera down. You don't want to point the camera up. You want to have equal ceiling, equal flooring, and then equal composition in the middle. Photographers call that the rule of thirds. And the reason why I want you to turn your grid on is I'm going to show you an example. This is what we call, most of the times when I'm shooting anything, with the exception of probably guest rooms, but your main rooms, your kitchens, your master bedrooms, if you have a nice bonus room or whatever, I try to shoot what we call a 1 point or a single point perspective. And the reason why you want your grid turned on is because that's going to allow you to keep your vertical lines at the edge straight. So if you guys ever been in a city and you're trying to take cell phone photos of a tall building, for example, when you tilt your camera up, you notice that the vertical lines converge. They go like this. What we're trying to do in interior photography is I'm trying to keep my lines, my vertical lines at the edge of the camera straight up and down, and I want my horizontals to be horizontal. If you have a grid on, you can line up your images for better composition so that your lines to the right and the left are up and down are vertical is what we're looking for. So I can show you an example. Here's an example of bad vertical lines. So this is my living room, and this is my cat you see here. I couldn't get him to move, so he's in the picture. But I've drawn red lines here, and you can kind of see, if you look over here, this line is pointing up to the right, and then this is up to the left, right? So, I mean, it may not bug you, but here is where the verticals are actually fixed. So if this is now straight up and down, you can see the lines are pretty much straight up and down, and this you can see the difference here. See how that pulls in and it gives a much more pleasing look to your picture? So what we're trying to do is try to keep your vertical lines as straight as possible and your horizontal lines as straight as possible. And when it comes to that, is this where we're going to get into what we call a single point perspective. So I try when I'm shooting to make all of my main images that are important single point perspective shots. This is a single point perspective. This is an example of a nice dining room and kitchen. You can see all my lines that you see here in red all go to a single point in the middle of the room. So if I tilted the camera to the left, for example, it would be skewed, and subconsciously it would bug you. You know, usually if you show people pictures of an angle versus a single points are typically more pleasing. Most people that shoot for interior designers or architects try to do single point perspectives as much as possible. I try to do that as well in real estate photography, especially on the main rooms, because it gives a much more pleasing photo. An example would be, let's see, I just shot one not that long ago where I used one on a, okay, so this would be a good example where I'm trying to shoot straight down the line here. You can still see that there's room over here, but my vertical lines are vertical. I try to do most of my shots in this manner. Good example also, I just shot this kitchen. This is what we call a single point perspective, where I'm going straight down the line, but you can see information on this side and over on this side. So as much as you can, always try and shoot the main rooms anyway. I don't do that with guest rooms, and guest rooms, especially if they're vacant, sometimes you just point the camera in the corner. I personally try not to show more than 3 walls. I try to only show 2 if I'm shooting into a corner. And when you're shooting, always trying to show the most important parts of a room. And what I mean by that is if you have a guest room, for example, and let's say there's a bathroom attached to that guest room, well, the important part of that room is that there's a bathroom attached to the guest room. So if you're only going to take 1 photo of that room, you would try to be, your 2 walls, one of them would be showing into the bathroom to show to the person that there's a bathroom attached to that guest room. And that's kind of how I try to shoot if I only can get 1 photo of a guest room. That works really well. Typically for guest rooms, if you have, you know, shooting into a window is always great. Usually a vacant guest room is going to have a window on one side, and I try to shoot into the windows, or if there's a wall with a closet, window and a closet if it's empty. If you have a bathroom, always try to shoot towards the bathroom if you can, to show 2 walls, one of them being here's a bathroom to that wall. And that will allow people who are viewing your photos to understand that room has a bathroom attached to it. So that's always a good a little good tip
Hey,
there.
Brendan.
Yep.
When you're picking out like this point, the single point perspective photos, like how
Yep.
do you determine what that point should be?
If you have what I guess we'd call a centerpiece, for example. So if you're in a nice master room and you have like a fireplace, I would always try and line up there. A lot of kitchens that I shoot now, as much as I can, they have like a line. You know, usually you walk down, if you have an island, it's usually down between the island to the oven. if the oven's on the other side. Sometimes you have a weird kitchen. Let me see. This is the one I shot yesterday. So let me see my kitchen photo. This kitchen was a little weird because it was just this little nook here. So I tried to shoot showing that there's a room back here as well. And sometimes if you have an open room, there's not much that you can do about it. Here's the final picture here. This just gives you information on this particular room if I can't do a one-point perspective. So in this particular image, I tried to let people know, hey, the main living room and the breakfast area is attached to the kitchen. Then I will do a single point perspective like this. So my single point perspective in this case is it runs straight down the line this way towards the living room to show you what the workspace would be if you're sitting in the kitchen. But for the most part, anytime you have a centerpiece, it's got to be equal sides. And that's why if your grid is on, you can always use your grid to line up important information on the left, important information on the right, top and bottom, and that will give you a more pleasing image.
Okay, awesome. Can you show us some examples of like the guest rooms that you were talking about and trying to get the angles that include bathrooms or closets?
Yeah, sure. Let me see.
Not to put you on the spot, but.
Oh, no, that's fine. You can also see here, this is an empty master bed, but I tried to do a one-point perspective to the wall on this particular one. So I'm shooting straight into the wall, and then on the opposite side, this would be shooting into the bathroom. So this is the master of this particular one. Sorry if this is grainy, my computer is going wild, but you can see I have a bathroom here, and I'm trying to show that, hey, you get up into the room over here, you know, this is the hallway. So, you know, really it's just shooting into what we call important rooms if they're available. Let me see the other guest room.
Yeah, it gives you a nice kind of perspective of what the whole flow of the room is going to look like because you're not missing any space in this. You're just showing the two different sides of it.
Yeah, exactly. Or in this case, you know, you have a dining room. You know, I'm trying to show that this dining room is, you know, connected this way. Some rooms you just can't do one-point perspectives on. You don't have to do it for every single one. Sometimes the only way to get the information is to angle the camera. I only do my one-point perspectives typically, like I said, in the important rooms. I don't typically do them all the time in guest rooms because, you know, otherwise you're going to get just an empty wall.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to find where these guests are.
Well, no, I think that's a good point, too, because I've seen a lot of listing photos where it looks like the agent is almost trying to make the room look really big, and then they end up with like this kind of like stretched wide angle look to the room. And
I personally don't shoot that way. I don't like opening my lens all the way up and making the room look huge. I personally don't shoot that way. Some people do, some people don't. I like to show the room as if you were a person walking in that room, what things should be perspectivized. Also, if you shoot super wide, you distort the edges of your frame. So if you guys are familiar, if you have a point and shoot camera, not a cell phone camera, but if you open super wide, you'll see that the edges start to bow like this. It's what we call a fisheye effect. When I'm shooting photos, I don't ever sit at the edge of my focal range, which means if I'm shooting, I shoot with a mirrorless 14 to 30 millimeter lens. I never shoot it at 14 millimeters, which is wide open, which would make, you know, even a small room look like a bowling alley. I try not to do that. There's tons of distortion. I try to sit in the middle of my frame somewhere. So if I have a 14 to 30 millimeter lens, I'm shooting typically at 20 to 24 usually. That's where I try to sit. But yes.
Did we talk about if you're using your iPhone, do you have a preference on shooting portrait mode or landscape mode?
Always shoot this way. Landscape.
Landscape here, I have my phone. Like this?
You want to shoot the way that Sarah has it as best as you can. You don't want to shoot this way. Same thing if you're taking video. If you're taking video with your phone, have your phone this way, not up and down. It fills
Facebook Live.
Yes. Well, it fills the frame completely. So if somebody's watching your media on a screen, for example, if it's done this way, it will fill their frame. You won't have black bars on the side. So if you guys have been on Facebook and somebody shares a video and they're taking it this way, there'll be black bars typically, frames real small. Try to avoid that as best as you can. One tip I will tell for everybody here, because what we're going to get into is one service that I would recommend, I guess, because they are also a Remax approved supplier, is Box Brownie. So what you can do is if you don't want to edit your photos, which you probably all don't want to edit your own photos, it takes a long time, that's a new skill you got to learn, is if you can get the high-res images from your phone, download them, and then send them to a service like Box Brownie at boxbrownie.com, they can actually enhance your photos for you. And they will help take color casts out, they can replace skies for the most part. And the way that you're going to get your high-res images that I'm going to recommend to you people is if you don't have Google Photos, I would download Google Photos to your phone, the app. Because what Google Photos is going to allow you to do is to, one, is going to back up all your images indefinitely. If you have a Pixel phone, that's already built into your service, meaning you don't need a 256 meg phone or gig phone, because at 64 gig it's backing up everything at high resolution for free. Google Photos is free. It will allow you to go in after you take your photos and back them up to go to photos.google.com, log into your Google, and I'll show you my screen so you can see. So if I go to my Google Photos, and I don't know what's on here, so be prepared. Okay, so here's some photos that I took yesterday. So if I wanted to download these in high resolution, it's literally as simple as just clicking them like this and then going up here and hitting download. And what that will do is allow you to send high resolution images to somebody versus a small resolution, because for people who are going to edit your photos, we don't want to see anything that's low resolution because there's not much that we can really do with that. So I would recommend, if you guys don't have Google Photos, to go ahead and download that and use that during this time, at least if you're going to be taking your own photos. And that will allow you to use a service like Box Brownie. And it looks like Jackie mentioned that they do virtual staging. You can also get your virtual staging there done for your empty rooms. So
yeah, and we're going to do a call with Box Brownie next week, so I'll let you guys know when I send out that schedule. I think it's Wednesday.
Yeah, and their prices kind of range. Yeah, when you use Google Photos, yeah, it can be too large for MLS. There are places online where you can batch resize your images for free. I will grab that link. I have it somewhere. I use Photoshop because I have Photoshop. Or in my case, Lightroom. I export all my photos out for MLS size right off the bat. So I will look into a solution for that. I know there's places that will auto batch resize photos for you. Or if you're sending them to Box Brownie, it doesn't matter because they're going to resize them anyway, or at least they should be doing that for what they charge. But yeah. Okay. What was the next thing on our list there, Sarah? Sorry.
Question before we jump on.
Sure.
Does Google Photos take the place of Dropbox? It's a question in the chat.
I mean, I guess it technically could, but really Google Photos is just for you. So you wouldn't be you can only view what's on your Google Photos by logging into your Gmail account or your Google account. So Dropbox doesn't really take the place of that. That's more of a thing to back up everything that you have for yourself.
So similar concept, but just once for photos and once for like files and Google
yeah,
Sheets.
Dropbox is a delivery method, similar to Google OneDrive. If you guys have that, that's another thing that you can use, or Microsoft OneDrive, whatever it's called. Another thing that if you guys are having a smaller space, for example, and you need to fill photos, I always suggest doing detail shots. If you can do detail shots. And by detail shots, I mean literally just go up. Here's a bunch of examples here where I'm just taking the phone and I'm going up to something and just showing you a quick little snippet of something. So it could be the edge of a bed with you can see here, this is window lighting. You can see it coming in from this side, gives you a nice pleasing shadows and stuff. Or if I'm just zooming in. So you guys can backfill your photos by just taking close-up photos of something like this. That will allow you to show details, and that will fill in. So if you have a smaller space, you can use detail shots to go ahead and kind of fill the space there. Looks like Candy has a question here.
I think she's going to send us some.
Yes. Can I just ask it because I keep putting the wrong words in what I'm typing?
No, go ahead, that's fine.
Okay, full disclosure, this is Candy LaMonica. I'm the one being an idiot here. I was confused about something you said, Brendan, about the high resolution photos. So if we store them in Google Photos, but we can't share them from there, so what do? We store them there and then download them to Dropbox?
Yes.
So,
share them with or somewhere?
Right, and it's mostly a problem from iPhones, I find. And I'm a new iPhone user. I've only had mine since, I think, December. So But the main image, the main thing that I get, and agents will sometimes, if they want me to design a postcard, I always ask for high-res images, and they'll send me email, for example. The problem is if you do that through an iPhone, it sends me low resolution, and you can tell by the file size. If the file ends in KB for kilobytes, it's too small. It's not high-res. If you have Google Photos, you can actually go to photos.google.com if you have the app on your phone and log in, and this will allow you to go ahead like I see here. Can you see my screen, Candy?
Yes.
Okay, so here, my daughter took these photos of me joking around. You can see with my hair. So, but you can click these and see we have little check boxes here. If I go to download, what it's going to do is it's going to download these photos into my downloads folder at high resolution. So when I open them up, you can see here, see it says 1.2 meg, 1.1 meg, 1.2 meg. Those are high resolution images. So if you're going to send that to an editor, you're going to want to send them those files, not the small kilobyte files.
And so you'd have to download those into Dropbox or some system.
Yeah, Dropbox, or if you have Gmail, if you try to send multiple files, it'll automatically typically try and compress that file and send you it through Google OneDrive. Usually it does.
Okay.
But I always suggest, Dropbox is what I pay for business Dropbox, so I have unlimited, space there. But if not, Dropbox.com will give you guys all free I think 2 gigs of space. And when you have old stuff on it, you're done, just delete it, and that'll give you your 2 gigs of space back again.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So just to clarify, the process would be you download the app, the Google Photos app on your phone.
Yep.
You take all your photos.
Yep.
Do they automatically go into your Google Photos app?
Yep. Yep. If they don't show up, if you open the Google Photos app, you can actually hit back up now, and when it's backing up, it's actually taking that to the Google Cloud, which will allow you to then go onto your laptop or desktop and go to photos.google.com and then select and download them all.
Fabulous. Okay. So
the process is you take your pictures, you back them up on Google Photos, you go to photos.google.com, you download them, then you're going to have to upload them to Dropbox if you're going to send them to somebody else.
And you
I
can
know that
also
sounds...
use the Google Drive too if you're already in Gmail and comfortable with it.
Right, or WeTransfer.com is also free. You could also use WeTransfer if you would like. I use that if I'm sending large audio files back and forth to people.
Okay.
Yep.
So is everybody clear on that process, just so that you can do that? And then essentially you're going to take that big bulk file, so whether it's in Dropbox or your Google Drive, and you're going to send that to a company like Box Brownie, and they're going to be able to access all those photos and do the edits and kind of adjustments that they need to, and then they'll send you back kind of the high-res version that hopefully look as good as they can for being an iPhone or a cell phone photo.
Yep. Pretty much. And I know that's kind of it. So what we can do is after this webinar is over, we can simplify the directions for you. I know that sounds like a lot. And it is, for you guys, it's probably going to be a lot of work on our end. There's not really a good way around this, just because when you're trying to get high resolution images, because yes, technically you could send a low res image to a photo editor and they could edit those photos for you. The problem with doing that is they're not going to look as good as if you had, the high resolution. So.
Yeah, these are tough times, guys, but we're gonna get through it.
we're all struggling here. So yes, I think that's most. Is there, what else did you have there?
So we have some questions online. Any tips for exterior photos?
Okay, for exterior photos, if it's super sunny like it is right now, and the sun is behind your house, meaning the front of it is in shadow. You're going to have to wait for a different time of day. There's just wait until what we call golden hour or twilight, and that's going to give you the most pleasing photo. That's when the sun's going to be near the horizon. The sun's near the horizon, your lighting is going to be nice and even. You're not going to have super dark shadows and super bright highlights, because that's what a photographer's nightmare is. When I go to a house and I know that the sun is behind the house, I only have 2 things. In my case, I will what they do called bracketing, where I will take a bracket of 9 images, meaning I'm going to take 1 photo at the correct exposure to the camera. I'm going to take like 4 of them underexposed, 4 of them overexposed, and I'm going to have to blend those. You guys don't have that option. That's why I mentioned before, if you have an HDR function on your camera, it's going to do a pretty decent job of getting you details in those shadows and highlights if for some reason you can't shoot it at a different time of day. If it's cloudy outside, that's even better because, you know, your photo will be probably nice and even at that point. But if you can't, twilight's always going to give you the best, you know, hero shot for your exteriors.
Okay, awesome. So I think for the most part, we got through all of our questions on our list. Now to kind of like recap it, I guess.
Oh, one thing I'll mention too that I forgot is don't ever zoom in with your finger. So if you have the camera like this, if you want to get closer to something, don't pinch to zoom. That adds what we call noise to it. It's going to be very grainy. If you want to zoom in, physically walk forward towards the object to zoom, because what that's going to do is it's going to keep the camera at the same focal length and give you the most detail. If you try to pinch to zoom, you're going to compress the image and add a bunch of noise that you don't want. Because a lot of people, you know, you're standing far away like, oh, I got to get detail, they'll pinch to zoom in, and that's going to make it look bad. I mean, as best as you can, try to fit the object in the frame without pinch to zooming.
No, that makes sense.
And did I get under, try not to shoot under cabinets if you can. So your camera height, like I said, if you have your grid on, try to have equal ceiling, equal flooring, equal stuff in the middle. Don't point the camera down because that will converge your verticals. Don't point it up, that will do the same thing. If you're in a kitchen, don't have the camera so low that you can see underneath the kitchen cabinets. That's one of my pet peeves. So I always try to keep my camera level basically just at the underneath of the cabinet or slightly above it. And that's a personal preference thing too. Every photographer has a different, what they consider best view. I don't like to show underneath cabinets. Should you change the brightness on the phone if the room's dark? Yes, you can do that. If you guys, you do have the option too, and what I was gonna mention is, if you can shoot RAW, which a RAW photo is a photo that has all of the shadow information, all of the highlight information in it. If you use a program like Lightroom Mobile, you can do a lot with your phone, believe it or not. You can move the shadow slider up and bring detail out of the shadows. You can turn the highlights down and sometimes get some information from the highlights back into your picture. And like I said, I believe Lightroom Mobile is free. At least it was at one point. I don't know if it is now. Adobe was doing a special because of the pandemic. But shooting RAW will allow you to really bend files yourself without sending them to anybody. But Mark, when you say just the brightness, there's a couple different ways that that's done. If you are familiar with RAW photos, or if you can manually pick your camera, you can actually change shutter speed and aperture, which is how I quote-unquote brighten a photo. So that's one way to do it if you want to shoot RAW. And you can shoot RAW by downloading apps from the Google Play Store or the App Store. Camera Plus is a good one. Heidel is a good one. Is that the Lightroom or Lightroom? Lightroom, L-I-G-H-T. So if you go to Adobe Lightroom, if you guys can see my screen, it's going to look like that icon with the L and the R. And there is a mobile version of it that you can you should be able to download. And I believe it's free. When I downloaded it, because I already have an Adobe subscription, it recognized it and just signed me in. But I was searching before my power went out this morning. I was searching and it looked like it was free for mobile users. So.
Okay, so I guess kind of key takeaways, and then we'll kind of recap everything, and then if anyone has any questions, let us know. But so you talked about composition and the rule of thirds. We talked about having kind of a focal point in your photos, having everything line up horizontally so that it's kind of a straight image.
As best you can. Yep, and if you have the, like I said, if you guys have the grid, make sure you turn your grid on. That will always, even if you're an amateur photographer, turning your grid on, and that's it. If you have an iPhone, hit your settings button, go down to camera, and then on mine, grid was literally the first thing that I can turn on. So if you turn your grid on and then open your camera, you will start to see grid lines on your phone. That in itself will help you take more pleasing compositions.
Awesome. And then the light suggestions as far as making sure that you have enough natural light or using the lights in the room. And then I think when you're taking photos of things like the guest rooms or rooms where they have kind of additional features, to make sure that you capture those in the photo.
Yeah, so like if you have important rooms off of guest rooms, always try to show those. If you're going to show what I call a 2 walls, always try to show those. If you, like I said, if you guys are in dark rooms, some people like, if you have a red dining room, for example, you're probably going to want to open up as much blinds as you can. You don't have to open them all the way. If you have the slats, you can just open the slats so that window light's coming in, and try to turn on all your practical lighting as best you can. And that goes for kitchens as well. Unless you have a nice neutral kitchen. Let's say you have a great window light, you have a gray wall, you don't have a navy blue or some crazy color in the back, you're always going to have really pleasing photos with window light. It's always going to give you your best, your most pleasing look. If that's not the case, you have, let's say you have black cabinets, for example. I run into this a lot. If you have black cabinets or super dark brown cabinets and you have like, you know, crazy greens or whatever, you're just going to have to turn all the practical lights on in this case. So turn on as much lights as you can. Turn on your HDR function on your phone, and that's going to give you the most detail in the shadows and the highlights, and I would tackle it like that. If you want them to be really stand out, if you guys spend like $50 on Amazon and buy one of those small little tripods that you can mount your camera on for like taking vlog videos, for example, or selfies, they call them selfie tripods. If you use that while you're taking your HDR photos, they will come out much better as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you, yeah, I don't know. I don't see where a chat thing is on here, so sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
I've taken pictures and of the rooms, and I've learned some great techniques to use and improve. So that's great. Thank you for that. But my question is, when I take a picture with a window with the sun coming in, the window's white, cloudy, and the room is nice. But then when I switch it to where you can see out the window, the room is dark. So is there any way to balance that?
Nope. That's where HDR is going to come in for you guys. So in my case, because I shoot with off-camera flash, yes, we do what we call expose for the view, which means to my if you have a regular DSLR camera, if I expose for the view, that means looking out the window, you can see the detail in the window, but your room will be completely dark because the camera is trying to expose for the stuff outside, right? So if you do that, the only way to bring the exposure up in the room is to add a light source to it. So in my case, I use off-camera flash. So I'll bounce a giant light in the thing, and that will bring the brightness level of the room up to the window so you can see through both. If you don't have that, you're going to want to point the camera away from the window. You can still have the window in the view, but you're going to want to actually aim the camera where it's exposing towards the room, and that will it'll try to equal them out. If you have HDR function on, it will automatically try to balance the two for you. But if you ever point a camera and it's exposing for a window, if you try to like point your your focal point at a window, it's going to expose for the window. And in that case, your interior, if you don't have lights on, will be completely dark.
Is that also something that like Box Brownie or those kind of companies can adjust for, or?
It depends on how much shadow. If you have a RAW file, then you can do a lot of bending with a RAW file. I can show you what that looks like real quick. So for instance, this is an ambient shot, so you can see these sliders here. So if I reset this, here's what the photo looks like straight out of camera, okay? See how dark that looks? If I'm shooting RAW, I can actually pull my shadows up, and I can pull my highlights down and adjust the exposure to give me something that's usable. So you can see like that's before, that's after I adjust it. But you can only do that with a RAW file. You're not going to be able to do that with an HDR compressed JPEG file. If you download Adobe Lightroom Mobile, you actually have the option of shooting RAW in their Capture app, which is super powerful. RAW files will always allow anybody editing to bend the most information out of that file, which is why any photographer that knows what they're doing is going to be shooting in a RAW format.
Okay, so for that kind of situation, download the Lightroom app, shoot
Or
it in the
or just
RAW
make
format.
sure. Yeah, make sure all your lights are on, and that you have as much light coming into the room as possible. And shooting HDR will give you the best of what it can do based off of the lighting in the room. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a tough situation.
That's a good question, Martin. I think Chris also had a question. Chris, if you want to unmute and ask, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, Brendan, this is great information. I appreciate it. I'm looking at I'm going back to your HDR advice, and I'm looking at my camera in settings, and at the bottom of mine it says HDR, high dynamic range.
Yep.
It says keep normal photo, and it's turned on, and under that it says HDR blends the best parts of 3 separate exposures into a single photo.
Yep.
Save the normally exposed photo in addition to the HDR version.
Yep, that's an option for you if you want to turn it on or off. It doesn't really matter. The original file, more than likely, you're not going to use anyway. You're going to want the HDR version of it. So, because what HDR really is on mobile, if you're using a Google phone or if you're using an iPhone, HDR, it's not a true HDR. A true HDR means I'm taking 3 separate exposures and I'm blending them. What your phone is trying to do is use a computer algorithm when you take a photo and give you the best it can in real time. So in your situation, you don't care about the regular photo. That's just the throwaway. You only need the HDR because it's also going to take up unnecessary space on your phone.
So the keep normal photo for me is turned on and always has been because I've never even looked at this or touched it.
In your case, go ahead and just flip that switch off.
Oh, flip it off?
Yeah, you won't even, you won't, because what's going to happen is you're going to have 2 copies of every photo. You're going to have the original, and then when you look at the HDR should, to you, look better. Because your shadows will be boosted, your highlights will come down.
The thing is, though, I've never noticed that I had 2 photos. And when I take a photo and then I go and look, I just see that photo.
Yeah, what kind of phone do you have?
It's an iPhone.
So I believe if you had a file Explorer app and you looked in, there's a completely separate folder, at least it worked this way on Google phones, where your original is kept separate from the HDR. So you may not have access to that folder, but it may be eating up your iCloud stuff.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions, guys? Brendan, can you give us a recap of kind of what services you're offering right now, maybe how they can reach you and what you can help them with?
Oh, sure. I mean, right now, if you guys have vacant properties, I'm always available to shoot vacant properties. I am the in-house real estate photographer for executives. I only really shoot for RE/MAX executive agents. I have been referred out a bunch of times to agents of other brokerages, but based off of what I do, I only really work with the executive agents. But I do quite a bunch of different things. Other than that, I do logos, I do branding, graphic design. If you guys want to farm neighborhoods, I am a print designer. I get you a great rate on EDDM postcard blasts. I pretty much can do almost anything that you can think of with the exception of websites. I don't do that because there's just too much stuff in websites to do. Another thing that's popular right now is Matterports. You guys have probably heard of that, which is Google Street. We do have a Matterport. I do Matterports. Matterport is actually really hot right now because if people are scared to physically go into a property right now, a Matterport is an open house that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you guys are interested in that, we can go over that real quick, or if people have to go, that's fine. We can do a separate thing on Matterport sometime if you would like as well, and I can kind of go over that. If you guys have questions on that, I'm always happy to help. But yeah, I mean, I do listing presentations. That's really hot right now as well. If you guys need custom listing presentations, but I'm usually really quick on email. Sarah, looks like just put my email information up there. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Based off of some of the people I've seen in here, I know I've worked with a couple of you at least. So you know, if anybody else has any questions, just feel free to reach out. I'm available 7 days a week.
Thank you, Brendan. This was a lot of really great info, and if you guys have questions, I'm sure that you won't mind if people reach out to you. If anything, it really makes you appreciate all the work that you've been doing that we didn't even know was happening when we were ordering photos.
Oh, it's great. You know, and from a print design standpoint, if you guys have seen any of the print material in any of the offices, chances are probably designed and fulfilled that. So that kind of gives you an example of what I can do. So yeah. But I'm always around. I'm always happy to help agents. Just let me know.
Alrighty. Well, if there's no more questions, we'll end there. Oh.
I have one more. Just real quick. What's the contact info?
Contact info. Let me see. If I open the chat here, does this work?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Okay. So my email I will put in the chat. It's brendan@charlotterealtyservices.com. You can contact me there. And that's my personal information. Shoot me an email there. and I will be happy to help. I would give you my office line, but I came in here and my phone is gone. And it's not like I'm going to my office anyway, so that doesn't really matter.
All right, guys.
Thank you, Brendan. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, guys.